There are some new details coming out about one of the biggest real estate brokerage closures in Canadian history. But before we get into the news about Ipro Realty, I want you to stick around because at the end of this video, I'm going to sit down with real estate lawyer Mark Morris of legalclosing.ca. He's going to break this whole thing down in detail. He's been advising a lot of people in the industry through this period of turmoil. And more importantly, he's going to share what you should do if you are a realtor or a client with money at risk in Ipro's trust account right now. But first, let me start with a couple of stories. One of our agents had a client who had just put a deposit in with Ipro literally days before the brokerage collapsed. That money was in limbo, and if it had landed in Ipro's trust account, it could have been frozen with everything else. Fortunately, we were able to act quickly, and with the help of Mark, we were able to get the check rerouted directly to the seller's lawyer's trust account instead of the brokerages. This is actually a really common practice in commercial deals where the seller's lawyer, not the brokerage, holds the deposit. In this case, it saved the client's money, potentially saved the deal, but not everyone was so lucky. Here's the flip side. I got a DM from a realtor who asked me to share this anonymously. Their client signed a mutual release on Friday upon announcement of the closure, and by Monday, Ipro had cut them a return check for their deposit. But when they tried to cash it, the check bounced. The account has been frozen. Imagine being that buyer, deposit tied up, dead deal, and now you're left wondering if you'll ever see the money again because there's an apparent shortfall in the account. This is the kind of nightmare scenario that agents and clients across Ontario are dealing with right now. So what's happening on the regulatory side? Here's what we know. The Real Estate Council of Ontario put an update out, and Ipro's co-founders are now permanently barred from trading real estate in Ontario. The shortfall has been revised. The missing money from the trust account is now estimated at under 8 million, down from the earlier reports of 10.5 million. A handful of leaders in the real estate space have called immediate police investigation of Ipro, and RICO has handed the case off to Peel Regional Police. But here's the twist. RICO themselves says it will not be charging the co-founders itself. That's the end of the road for disciplinary action at the regulatory level. That doesn't mean they're off the hook, obviously. Criminal charges could still come, and that's where the police are going to step in. And this case really exposes the gap between what regulators can do. They're really limited to the profession, and once that entity is shut down, they end up not really having a role anymore. They can revoke a license, they can ban someone from a profession, or in this case, they can shut down a brokerage. But in the case of criminal activity, the rest is really up to the police and the courts. Fines, restitution, and even prison time is not something that the regulator itself can do. And with millions of dollars in deposits tied up, this is going to need to be more than a regulatory slap on the wrist. This is about consumer protection, protecting the ailing integrity of the industry, and the very trust that underpins every real estate transaction. So where does this leave you if you are a realtor with commissions outstanding or a client with money in Ipro's trust? What can you actually do right now to protect yourself or recover these funds? This is why I brought in someone who knows this better than anyone, Mark Morris from legalclosing.ca. He's going to walk us through what all of this means, what steps you should take, and how to avoid situations like this in the future. So let's get to that interview. I got one of my favorite people in the world here who is kind enough to carve out some time up at the cottage to give me an update on what's going on with Ipro. So just give me a quick introduction. Who are you? What do you do? And why are you qualified to be talking about this?
Thanks, Dan. Actually, I'm not sure anyone's qualified to be talking about this because
Fair.
there's been so little information that's been released. But I'm Mark, an old friend of yours, Dan, and that's a pleasure to be back on. I run legalclosing.ca. I've been a lawyer for 25 years. I deal exclusively really in conveyance operations, commercial, residential. I've run some large firms that focus in that space. And I also represent a whole lot of brokerages as their lawyer of record, dealing with compliance issues, dealing with RICO and the like. This is my bailiwick.
Yeah. So in that regard, I know you'd done us a favor at my brokerage, and we had an agent who had some buyer's deposits that were wrapped up in this whole thing. And I just wanted to can you walk me through that process and what people should be thinking about or doing if they're in the position where they are exposed to this Ipro thing?
Yeah. File early, file fast. If you take a look, so every real estate agent has access to what's it called? Whatever the Claims Pro site is that realtors use, the RICO insurance document. And if you take a look at Schedule A of RICO's insurance document, it actually stipulates amazingly that it will pay out on a first claim basis. No, I don't think that they're going to do that. I don't want to instill mass panic. I can't see a circumstance where they don't pay out pro rata. That instead of using, no esoteric terms, let me just explain. There's two different ways of paying out claims that are in excess of what insurance will cover. pro rata, which means everyone who makes a claim shares equally in the pot, or first come, which means that if you make your claim first, you get 100% of your money. Okay, the remaining claims are used to pay out the remaining balance. It's seemingly the case that the insurance for RICO stipulates that a first claim will avail itself of the pot. I, again, don't see that happening, but in an effort to be cautious, in an effort to benefit yourself, if you're a broker of record, or if you're someone who has either a commission claim or a consumer claim, it's really critical that you actually go ahead and invoke the claims pro process. Don't wait for your closing to happen. If you're dealing with iPro, make the claim immediately.
Yeah. And when you talk about the pro rata one, like the thing that stands out to me was like the Bernie Madoff thing, right? Where after they had settled, they actually started going back to people who had gotten their payouts and asking them to forfeit half of what they got to help pay out some of the other people. Is that, if it goes that route, is that something that could end up happening, or are we at risk of that?
The problem is that RICO has not been in any way helpful here at all. But I can draw on some experience. I was actually the lawyer of record for Redpin when it went down. Now, Redpin went down in very different circumstances. It went down through not fraud or misappropriation, but rather just bankruptcy. And when it did, commissions were owed, and commissions were eventually paid pro rata, not on a first come basis. But short of that experience, which I have been through, and by the way, it went through litigation as well, there's really no indication from RICO how they plan on dealing with this. In fact, spectacularly unhelpfully, they say speak to your lawyers, and the lawyers don't have any clue either. So truthfully, it probably won't play out as Bernie Madoff did. My guess is that they will make a decision at the outset as to whether or not they're paying pro rata. That is to say, they're dividing up the pot, or they're paying on a first come, first served basis. Pro rata is probably where they'll go, but there's no basis for figuring out one or the other outside of what's contained in the basic insurance documents themselves.
So is there risk that buyers will lose their deposits here, or is the higher risk that agents will lose their commissions?
Okay, so there's two different baskets of protections that are offered through a RICO insurance policy. The first is commission protections, for which there is a $4 million max. And the second is consumer protections, for which there is a $4 million max. And whilst there is a equivalency between them, the coverages are largely the same. There is a world of difference practically between them, because RICO is seen as the guard. Self-regulation is a privilege, and the Ontario government has given that privilege to the profession of real estate, like they've given it to the lawyers and said, you can self-regulate. You can do this yourself. Self-regulation necessarily requires trust of the public. And if a single dollar of deposits that have been put in place by consumers is lost, trust will be inexorably challenged. And as a result, even though legally the obligation of the insurer is just for a $4 million pot, if there is $8 million in money missing, not from the commission trust account, but rather from the generalized trust account, that is to say, the account that was holding buyers and sellers' monies, then at that point, even though the coverage limit is $4 million, I fail to see how RICO can do anything except levy what is a special assessment on realtors or whatever it may be to cover the remaining balance. Because after all, law is one thing, practical reality of losing trust is another. Is it worth it for $30 per agent? Because that's what it would work out to. For us to lose the trust of the general public, stating that your monies are not safe when you put them into a brokerage trust account, I don't think that anyone could take that blow. So it is the case that commissions probably will have a $4 million cap. And if there is more commissions than that due and owing, and there will be, particularly probably in the new build space, and we can talk about that, there will be hell to pay. But as to the general public and their funds, I just do not see a reality where RICO turns to the general public and says, our insurance has paid out $4 million, and that brings this to a wonderful day. Now you, buyer and seller who put trust in a real estate brokerage that we have authorized and we have been responsible for, now you get to lose your money. The repercussions of that would be severe.
Okay, so two things there. Then number one, you mentioned in the new build stuff. Do you want to expand on that first?
Generally, when you do a new build deal, just talking average, 4% commission is paid. Usually 1% commission is paid, or 2% of that is paid in the first couple of years of the contract signing. often within 90 days, 120 days, whatever it may be. And then there will be the remaining balance, the extra 2% that's paid on final close. Builders are currently hurting. If iPro ceases to exist, which is not what's happening at the present time, but if iPro ceases to exist, then there's no one with whom they have a contractual obligation to pay commission, that remaining balance of 2%, over all of the new construction that's to take place over the course of however many years. And even if iPro does exist in its current incarnation, iPro as an organization will effectively cease to exist. And it will be the case that it will be up to RICO to put in place proper enforcement mechanisms to say, hey, on behalf of iPro and its structured commissions with you, we are now making a demand, and put enforcement mechanisms in. Because if the builders see weakness, or they see that there's not someone at the helm, or they see that there's not someone who will enforce commissions, there's a 2% savings right there at a time when they're all hurting. Why would they pay those commissions? And if we can assume that those commissions, particularly the new build commissions, are not going to actually make their way to iPro's trust account, commission trust account, for the purposes of the brokers, then those claims are going to start racking up and probably greatly exceed $4 million in short order.
Okay. And then I guess the other question is like, how did we get to the point where I would imagine they've been investigating this for a bit. Like, how did this just keep going? How did it get to the point where it got so far out of control?
So let me pause for a second and talk about the fact that RICO has specifically not said what the nature of this fraud is. They've talked about the fact that there's missing funds, but they haven't used the word fraud intentionally, because fraud has a whole bunch of repercussions. But importantly, I've run a law firm of significant size, and I know how many hands get into the cookie jar when you start dealing with size. It's impossible for one individual to have just their hands on the cookie jar, on the trust account. In fact, as you grow, as you scale, you have to use controllers, you have to use daily reconciliations, you put trust in your accounting departments. It may very well be that we discover that the owners of iPro are blameless. They wouldn't be blameless because they have ultimate responsibility. Weren't the ones who engineered this fraud. And actually, from a business perspective, Dan, there's good reason to suspect that. You're a sophisticated man, and your listeners, as you say, are sophisticated. And you're aware that the way businesses are valued, brokerages included, are effectively to take the NOI of a given place, put it over a discount rate, and sell it for value. If you have 2,400 performing agents and you're one of the largest brokerages in the city, achieving more than an $11 million or a $10 million sale price based on your NOI is probably very doable. Something they can no longer do the way that they have engaged in conduct to date. That is to say, most of their agents will end up leaving them. And if they end up leaving them, then there is no underlying value that they can sell. From a pure business perspective, this fraud makes no sense. If they wanted to cash out, selling for their existing NOI, given that they were one of the largest brokerages in the city, would have net more. And I bring this up simply to say that the fraud may not have been engaged in by the principals. Perhaps it was a controller. Perhaps it was an accounting clerk. It could have been someone else who did this. We don't know. And it's worthwhile mentioning that at the outset. Your question, though, directly was,
How did it get this far? Are there checks and balances? Did something break to allow this to perpetuate, like to the point where we can't?
Let me share a reality. The reality is that we say self-regulation and we say audits, but the truth is most of us do not get audited. In my entire career as a lawyer, I've been audited twice, both in the first year of starting up my firms. I once actually begged the Law Society for an audit when I was starting to do wills, a practice audit. I couldn't get them to do it. And they're swamped. There's a million brokerages. Now, they're to be faulted because obviously when large brokerages go down, the ramifications of a large brokerage going down vastly exceed the smaller brokerages. But at the same time, the smaller brokerages are the ones more likely to have the trouble. And so they have this problem of allocating their time. And so to some degree, they are deficient in their auditing practices, probably because they have a lack of resources. They don't want to admit this because at the end of the day, they've been charged with self-regulation. But it's evident it's been 8 years since these guys last had their audits. And that speaks, I think, to the pitiful way that Canadians, not just in real estate brokerage work, but for the law societies and other people who are in charge of customer funds, they're under-resourced. And that's a truth that's known in regulatory regimes. In this instance, it was 8 years, I believe, since their last audit. And the thing that makes the iPro mess so problematic is that the owners of Ipro sat on the RICO board until 2023. And because of that, there needs to be heightened scrutiny and dispatch from what is the normal procedure. RICO itself is subject to claims, whether true or not, that it was unduly influenced by the principals of this firm into not engaging in an audit, specifically because of their positions. And so they should be going out of their way in this instance to ultimately trying to assuage concern in that regard. In terms of how this happened, though, just very bluntly, it happened specifically because clearly there are insufficient resources such that an audit does not need to take place more than once every 8 years for one of the largest firms in the city. As a matter of course, it also speaks to RICO probably not properly constructing itself. It is probably the case that RICO would be well served by having two separate audit tracks, one for ones that can create systemic risk because they're so large that their failure exceeds insurance premiums and goes to consumer related problems such as we discussed earlier, and one that deals with smaller firms. And who knows, maybe that'll be the lesson. Maybe that's what they'll take to heart here. But perhaps a bifurcated approach to auditing is in order, because obviously what is taking place here is going to overwhelm the normal guardrails that we have through our insurance mandates.
Yeah. In that regard, what should, if there's a realtor or a client who has a deposit in with Ipro doing, I know you mentioned file early, file fast, all that stuff, but
If you have your deposits in with if you have your deposits in with Ipro presently and your transaction has not yet taken place, it's 3 months hence, immediately get an amendment signed by the buyer and the seller. Immediately get an amendment signed by the buyer and the seller, along with an irrevocable direction to Ipro to immediately pay the deposits to the seller's solicitor and trust. And the reason you want to do that is because if you're going to have a problem with Ipro, it's better to discover that you're having a problem with Ipros early rather than later. And so it is the case, let me remind everyone, that you are permitted to release monies from a brokerage trust account in one of three instances, just because everyone gets this wrong. One is completion of the transaction. 2 is a court order. And 3 is a mutual agreement. A mutual release is a type of mutual agreement, but a mutual agreement between the parties is all that is required to remove deposit monies from trust. So what I am suggesting to your listeners to do, if they have money, is to get a mutual agreement between the buyer and the seller, authorizing the removal of the money from Ipro's trust account immediately, along with an irrevocable direction to pay it to the seller's solicitor. The thinking being that the earlier you can move that money, the better. And if Ipro doesn't move that money quickly, you at least have time to deal with that in advance of your close.
Yeah.
And that's the advice I've been giving to every client who has been asking questions in that regard.
Yeah, it's smart. And then at least you identify the problem soon. And also, because I guess it also prevents the issue of it like obstructing your closing, right?
Correct.
If the deposit doesn't show up on closing, then there's a shortfall of funds. And now all of a sudden you've got a bigger problem to deal with because somebody's not getting a house or whatever.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, legal question. I don't think that there's an answer to it. But what happens if, because of a third party that both the seller and the buyer have agreed to use, there isn't sufficient money to actually conclude a deal? I would think that if that goes to court, that would be a novel principle because it's not a breach. Both parties have agreed to put it in a place that has failed them. And then the question becomes, okay, if both parties have agreed to this, should the transaction still conclude? And my guess is a court would probably still order it to conclude, but this is untested case law.
And then the fair outcome would be maybe they split the loss on the deposit or something like that.
Probably the way this would go. The equity of the courts would probably interject here. Hopefully it doesn't get to that because as regards to consumer trusts, if RICO doesn't step up and ensure every single bloody dime, then they should not be a regulator in this province. Plain and simple. They need to ensure Ontario's consumers that our brokerage trust funds are safe and secured. And if they do not do that, then there will be repercussion.
Same advice for realtors who have commissions sitting there, or are they?
No, realtors are screwed. Redpin has proven that realtors are screwed. Realtors will get their commissions to the max of the event payout, which is $4 million.
So half the commissions are disappearing.
So the commissions are going to be, it's going to be very messy. It's going to be very messy. So again, if you have any commissions due and owing, file early, file often, file now, file tomorrow, file the next day. Don't leave your computer. Just keep filing. Get them in.
Is that something that you told people to call their lawyer? Is this something that you do? I imagine you're doing a lot of this right now.
I'd like to say yes, because it makes me look like a much more competent lawyer, but actually I'm currently at my cottage, and no, I'm not doing it. I'm just telling the brokerages of record to do them.
Right. Fair.
And actually, the brokers that I'm the lawyer of record for have all filed on behalf of their clients immediately. So it's all been done through the brokerage so far, not through the lawyers.
If people want to ask you questions about this and need your help, where should they find you?
I do enjoy the sound of my own voice, and I'm more than happy to hear it. I'm more than happy to speak to any of your listeners anytime, Dan.
Cool.
So
Legalclosing.ca.
it's legalclosing.ca. That's it. And my email is mmorris@legalclosing.ca. But note that I'm away on vacation this week. You might have to wait till Monday.
Yeah, I'll let you get back to your holiday. I really appreciate you carving
Terrific.
out the time. It's late at night too, just so everyone's aware. It's like we're like 9:45. We're recording this. Mark, I honestly, man, like always appreciate it. Your insight's amazing. Yeah, thanks a lot. I think everybody's really going to benefit a lot from this.
Dan, I appreciate everything you do for our community. I watch all your shows, and you're a great source of insight to me as well.
I'm trying my best, man. The support means a lot. Anyway, I'll let you get back to it. Thanks again, brother.
Tremendous. My best.